Hi everyone, welcome to Pattern Magic Stitches. I'm Tina. Today I'm going to show you how to make this Raglan Blouson pattern. For this design, I recommend use fabric like wool blends, cotton twill, or gabardine. Make sure to choose your size based on the measurement table in the tutorial. I recommend 7 to 10 of each. I'm skipping the cutting part here. Detailed instructions are available in the manual. Here is my first photo. I made this one using a heavy gabardine fabric. Alright, let's get started. First, we are going to prepare all the pieces, which is applying interfacing. Because that fabric was quite thick, it didn't need as much interfacing as the version I'm making today. Our fabric is very soft. We want to attach the interlining on the front, so can make it become more structured. I didn't do this step in my first photo because the fabric was gabardine, which is very thick and heavy. I use the lining piece to give the shape. I will add in the final pattern file. I just cut and attach it. Make sure to trim the edges slightly so the interlining doesn't show through once the lining is attached. After the interlining is on, it's time for stay tape. Since this is a Raglan sleeve design, many of edges are cut on the bias. So I will apply the tape to the side seams, the sleeves, the front edges, and the neckline to prevent the fabric from stretching out of the shape. Now I'm going to show how to attach tape. When I arrive the curve here, make some cut and let it go naturally. As you can see here, after overlock, the sleeve edges become ripple. So we have to give some stretch like this to bring back the measurement. Okay, another thing to notice is our tape no need to be arrived at edges because we are going to stitch in 1 centimeter, which is here, and we iron open the seam allows, which we can't see. So it's okay to give some distance. As you can see, where the part I put the interlining and where I didn't put, it's much difference. Also, this is no standard. So it really depends on what fabric you're working on. If you have flowing fabric, so better you put the interlining. Now we're working on the back panel. Put the tape to enforce all around the edges. Remember, when you're attaching the tape, stretch a little bit, but not too much. Since we are using a soft fabric, so better also put the interlining on the back shoulder part. As I said, it's no standard, really depends on what kind of fabric you're working on. I will put also this pattern piece in the final file. I have to mention that this step is working on before attach the pocket after cut the fabric. I put on my body so you can see clearly the difference. If it is a fabric thick, then you don't need. Like our first prototype, we didn't put any interlining on the front and back. We just put on the belt and the cuff. As you can see, after I put the interlining, become more stable. The fabric not moving and it is flat. Overlock the pocket lining and the main fabric together. Then let's start on the pockets. Start to fold 2.5 centimeter on the top and fold another 2.5 centimeter. Okay, here is a one tips before you go into top stitch. You fold like this. 9 millimeter of stitch here and flipping. So when we're going to attach on the front here, inside is very clean. Stitching to the 2.5 point exactly here. Before flipping, you can cut away the angles, so it's come more cleaner, more thinner. Use a scissors angle to push the point. Let you have a nice shape. Okay, so both sides. I'm basting the pocket first to keep it stable during top stitching. Try to push the lining up slightly so it stays hidden in the seams without pulling it. Keep it flat. You're also basting this line, as you can see. When you're basting, try to put the fabric inside. So after going to machine, you can follow this line to top stitch. Use your finger to guide the edges while top stitching. Stitch about 1 millimeter from the edge. If you feel difficult, flip it over and sew from the opposite side. Now we are going to fold 1 centimeter of edge. If you want to be more precise, you can cut your lining pattern and remove the seam allowance. This way, you can use the paper as a present template. I will include this pattern in the final file. Now start folding 1 centimeter of edge. Okay, and now I'm going to attach it to the front piece. Place it on the front panel at the marking we made earlier from the pattern. Then top stitch 1 millimeter from the edge, keeping a 5 millimeter parallel line. Now we are going to make the pocket flap, placing the right sides together. Then we stitch around, leaving the top part open with stitches with a 7 millimeter seam allowance. Before flipping it, we need to trim this down to reduce the thickness, otherwise it would be too bulky. So once we flip it, just make sure everything is nice turned out and all edges are out. Adjust the shape a bit, then press it with an iron or sting iron on both sides. You can use the tip of scissors to help push out the seams if you need. Alright, that's it. We are going to attach it to the front panel to make it easier. We first find the point where the pocket flap will sit. This is a stitching position. Then we shift it down by 5 millimeter because we will stitch 5 millimeter from the edge. We mark the line with chalk. Now let's try to flip it and check. Pin it in place. This 5 millimeter line helps us simulate the stitching line. Then we flip it to check. We want to see if the pocket flap covers the pad pocket properly. In this case, as you can see, it doesn't fully cover the pocket. So I need to move it slightly forward, pin it again. Because this pocket has a shape where the front is slightly higher, we need to adjust carefully and check the position. If you are working with a flat square pad pocket, you won't have this issue. Let's flip again and check, like before. Okay, now it covered perfectly. We first stitch it at 5mm seam allowance, then flip. And then we do another top stitch at 7mm. Make sure it covers these edges. Have a look. So after finishing this pocket, I'm going to attach the undersleeve. I've also added tape to the undersleeve. Now I'm going to assemble the undersleeve. Right sides together. See all the way from here to here, and stop at this 1cm point. It finished here. There is a 1cm seam allowance here. So after this step, we will move on to attach the back panel. Now I'll show you from the front. Basically, it looks like this. You can already see the Raglan shape. After stitching 1cm all the way down the side, I'm going to press it on open. When I reach the underarm, I try to use iron table to follow the curve shape. I also gently stretch the seam allowance at the underarm while pressing. Once it's finished, when you look from the right side, it won't pull the fabric. Since this fabric is very lightweight and flowy, I overlock all the edges, but I don't want the overlock to show. So I fold the overlock edge to the inside and the top stitching 1mm like this, bit by bit. After finishing this 1mm top stitch on the seams and tucking the overlock inside, the inside become very clean and neat. Now use the pattern to transfer the dot making again, because we already closed the inner seam. Pin it, you can draw the stitching line first, match the line on both sides along the inner sleeve seam. Use a piece of cardboard as a guide. Be careful not to stretch the fabric since the sleeve isn't on grain, like I mentioned earlier. Don't backstitch here. Instead, tie the thread by hand. Also, make sure the dart point is not too bulky. After sewing the dot on the both sides, I'm going to press them. Since the elbow area has a curved shape, I'm using this part of iron board to help shape the fabric. This allows the fabric to follow the curve naturally. All the seam allowance are pressed upward. Make sure the dots are pressed open nicely. So when you turn it to the right side, the fabric falls naturally. Now we're going to attach the back panel to do the undersleeve. Match the notches. After that, we'll also assemble the side and shoulder seam. Now let's start pin it in place. Then stitching within 1cm seam allowance from this point to here. When you sew, make sure to match the angle properly like this. 1cm seam allowance all around. Then just like before, I fold the overlock edges to the inside and top stitching 1 millimeter from the edge. So once this is done, we can move on the side seam. Start by matching the notches, then sewing with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Just like other edges, fold the overlock inside and the top stitch down. Next, we will assemble the shoulder and join to the outer sleeve. Always make sure the notches match. Be careful not to stretch the fabric. And remember the last notch marks the stopping point because this section is left open. It's a slight 1 centimeter seam allowance. Fold the overlock inside, top stitch 1 millimeter. Now that both panels are done, we can go ahead and join the back pieces together. Start by planing everything. Then sew with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Just follow the notches while sewing. After that, press the seam open, then fold the overlock inside and top stitch down. We just finished the body panels. Next, we are going to attach the zip flap and the zipper. First, let's prepare the zip flap. As you can see, I've added the interfacing for the structure. Place them right side together. So from here to here with 7 millimeter seam allowance. After sewing, train the seam allowance, especially on the curved part. This reduces bank when we turn it through. Then press the seam open and turn it right side out. So the zipper will be sit here. When you press it, roll it slightly like this to shape it properly. Just make sure the seam line stays on the inside. We are sewing extra large and the zip length is 48, but we found out that our fabric is shrinking, so we are going to remove some piece of the zipper. For this pattern, I add a flap to cover the zipper teeth. We need to press and fold the front edge like this. We fold it by 1.5 centimeter. Then we press it in place. After that, we top stitch at 5 millimeter, attaching it to the zip flap. Okay, so now we have to fold the edges exactly 1.5 centimeter. So you do that in a quick way. Just measure it with your measuring tape 1.5. Then you just need to iron, so you don't need to chucking it or pencil it. This is like a quick way to do. So now we have our both sides folded at 1.5 centimeter. Place the zipper onto the zip flap. Use a long stitch at 5 millimeter to baste it in place. Now position the front piece so it covers exactly half of zipper teeth. Make sure the end of the front are aligned properly. Remember, don't pin through the zip flap when you do left side of front. Now we can top stitch at 5 millimeter to attach the zipper and the zip flap. To make easier and more accurate, you can baste first before stitching all the way. So now 5 centimeter to top stitch. And that's it. The zipper is done. Remove all the baste. So now next step is going to close our neckline. Pay attention here. We have an upper collar and an under collar. The upper collar is the outside part and the under collar goes underneath. The upper collar is slightly bigger. You can see the difference here. Just like the zip flap, after turning it right side out, we roll the seam slightly to the inside so the stitching line won't show outside. This is already included in the pattern. Now match all the notches, then stitch outside edge. Remember to start from this point, 7 millimeter. Approve the edge here. Start here. Then stitch all the way around and finish at this point, leaving the button open. Okay, now that collar is stitched, we're going to press the seam open. This helps the collar look cleaner after flipping. I know this curved part is a little tricky, but try to press the seam open as much as you can. Now trim the edges. Push the angles out. And now we iron flat. Roll the seam slightly to inside, so stitch line won't show outside, like I said before. And here is the result. Now you can see this is a button of collar. That means this side will be attached to the neckline of jacket, and this is outer side. Now we just need to pin it everything together and match all the notches. Then sew with 1 centimeter seam allowance and press the seam upward. Now what we are going to do is we are going to stitch the side adjuster. So one side you have to put the inside lining and you assemble it together. The right side to right side, we stitch all around the corner 7 millimeter. So once we finish the side adjuster, trade the corners, then we will have a nice shape. Use a tip of scissors to gently push out the corners. Make sure the corners are nice and sharp. So now for the waistband, we've cut the fabric and adding the interfacing. I've already marked the position. This red mark is for the side adjuster. Next, we fold it in half. Press it with sting to set the shape. Next, we can assemble the side adjuster. We stitch at 5 millimeter. Then turn it over and stitch it at 7 millimeter. Tuck the corners neatly inside. Make sure the position stays straight. This 7 millimeter top stitch is the same method as a pocket flap. Now we need to stitch the corners, but leave 1 centimeter allowance for attaching it to the body later. 1 centimeter stitch, flip it inside out, and iron flat. After that, we prepare the cuff. As you can see, we've cut the fabric and added interfacing. We fold in half. And stitch with a 7 millimeter seam allowance on both ends. We leave the top open because it will be attached to the sleeve later. And we fold 1 centimeter on just one side of the cuff. Then we press it with an iron. We trim the corners. Turn each inside out. Always make sure to push out the edges. And give the cuff a nice iron flat. After finish the cuff, we attach it to the sleeve. Remember, inside part of the cuff face the wrong side of sleeve. We start by pinning it in place. The first notch is our starting point. Remember, the pleat is facing towards the side. The second notch marks the pleat position. The middle notches is for the inner sleeve seam. Then just match the end point. We sew with 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way around. So once everything is attached, press the seam downward. Now we close the cuff. It's very simple. Just use the 1 centimeter fold we already made. Align it with the stitching line. and top stitch at 1 millimeter all the way around to close the cuff. Just like this, I'm pinning it in place. Once it pins in place, we are going to top stitch at 1 millimeter to close the cuff. Make sure the edges align with the stitching line. Use a specific foot, the one where one side is higher. This helps us top stitch more easily. Always check the cuff edges stays aligned with the sleeve stitching line, so it catch both sides. If it feels too difficult, you can also do by hand. We're moving to lining part. We've overlocked all around except the neckline and the zip area. After overlocking, we are going to assemble the side seam, right side to right side. 1 centimeter stitch. Press the seam allowance towards the front, then fold the hem edge by 7 millimeter, so it's done with a 1 millimeter stitch. Bit by bit. Since the hem is on the bias, we need to be careful here. Press it flat with an iron using sting. Once I finish both sides, I place the back pieces together. Make sure the center matched properly. Now I can close the shoulders. So with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Once the shoulders are sewing, press the seam open. After the shoulders are finished, we can fold the front armhole edge, just like we did for the hem. Now place the lining inside the body. Start connecting the lining to the front and the collar. Turn the lining inside out with right side facing the body. Now start pinning everything together. Remember, we left 1 centimeter open when sewing the collar. That section is for attaching the lining. Always match the notches and match the center back as well. Just to pin everything together. Stitch 1 centimeter all around. From the right front, around the collar, to the left front. Always check the lining while sewing. This area can be a bit difficult because of the zipper and the zip flap. It gets quite thick here. So sewing slowly, bit by bit. Try to catch the corner of collar hem together with the lining and match them neatly. So now we need to secure the collar, otherwise it will keep moving around. Try to match all the points carefully. Match the inside shoulder seam with the outside shoulder seam. Center back to center back. Then top stitch as 1 millimeter. Always check your stitch as you go. Top stitch all the way around. If it feels difficult, you can also sew it by hand. Then just give it a gently press with the iron. This will help everything it flat and keep its shape nicely. Now we are going to attach the waistband to the body. Remember, just like the cuff construction, we fold 1 centimeter on the top edge first. So now we start to pin everything together. The inside of the waistband faces the inside of the body. Match the side notch. Then match the center back. Left side. And finally the left front. Don't forget to catch the lining as well. Now sew with a 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way around the button hem. Always check that all layers are catched in the seam. After that, press the seam allowance downward, just like we did for the cuff. Before we close the waistband, feel where all the seam come together. This area gets quite thick. Try to trailing away a little bit of the seam allowance around the corners to make everything flatter and cleaner after turning. This also helps the corners look sharper. Then start pinning, or baste it first if you need it. Then top stitch at 1 millimeter to close it. Use your hands to help stabilize the fabric, and don't let the machine stretch it. After that, we can do the second top stitch at 5 millimeter, the same style as a pocket flap. After we finish the hem, we're going to close the armhole by hand stitching. The armhole, we also want to fix here, but we do space to, how to say,
Just do like a loop basically to attach it to the body, no?
yeah,
La manica è troppo
like
bucata
this.
rispetto al giro, è troppo bucata qua. Deve essere più morbida, più piena qua. Però tu devi sapere recuperare un pochino.
Questa è in parte.
Quindi questa due cose puoi fare. Ora
Now we're going to give it a final press with the iron. Thank you so much for your watching. I hope you enjoy sewing your own Raglan Blouson. Don't forget to share your result with me on Instagram. Happy sewing!